All right, we begin this morning, though, in Ukraine, where fears of a Russian invasion remain high and hopes of averting a conflict hang in the balance.
In an address to his nation yesterday, Ukraine's President Zelensky suggested an attack could come tomorrow. Then his spokesperson later clarified that he was referring to what was already being reported in the media. Zelensky said Ukrainians should, quote, make it a day of unity. New satellite images show increased Russian military activity along the border with Ukraine. Despite the buildup, Moscow says it's still willing to give diplomacy a chance ahead of today's meeting between Russia's Vladimir Putin and Germany's chancellor. And just this morning, a slight glimmer of hope. Russia's defense ministry says it's pulling back some troops from the border. In Washington last night, President Biden spoke with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the phone. Both leaders agreed the window for diplomacy remained open, with the White House signaling its readiness to engage with Moscow.
It remains unclear which path Russia will choose to take, because we do not know. It is his decision to make. We remain engaged with Russian government in full coordination with our allies and partners. The path for diplomacy remains available if Russia chooses to engage again constructively.
Our team is standing by to bring you more on this story. We'll go to our senior White House correspondent, Kelly O'Donnell, in Washington in a moment with the latest on American diplomatic efforts. But we're going to start with NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and NBC News reporter Matt Bodner in Moscow. So, Aaron, I want to start with Russia saying it's going to pull back some of its forces from the border. What are Ukrainians making of this? Could this be the start of any de-escalation?
Hey, Joe. Well, the Ukrainian government is reacting skeptically to this latest announcement from the Kremlin, with the foreign minister, Ukrainian foreign minister, saying, we have a rule. Don't believe what you hear. Believe what you see. When we see a withdrawal, we will believe in a de-escalation. We also heard from the spokesperson for the Ukrainian president saying that they're taking these reports cautiously and that any troop movements can be quickly moved back. I was speaking to Ukraine's former defense minister, who's part of a think tank here in Kyiv, who's been analyzing the situation very closely. He says that he has seen a small amount of troops being moved. He said that it was not a big deal, although noting in his estimation he believes a risk of escalation for tomorrow is low, and that he remains concerned with the situation to the south, the Russian military exercises in the Black Sea that he says are blocking off large chunks of the sea. And that is a big deal in Ukraine, because 95% of the country's exports leave through ports to the south. So there's still some concern, plenty of concern here in Ukraine about the overall situation, Joe.
So, Matt, how is Russia explaining these troop movements? Should we read much into that decision?
Thank you, Joe. Well, it's interesting. So right after they announced this very kind of non-specific withdrawal, we started seeing a PR blitz. And we saw the foreign ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, say that today is the day that they destroyed Western media war hysteria without firing a shot. And frankly, if that's the worst thing that happens at the end of this, I'm okay with that. The fact is we continue to see evidence of a buildup. You know, just this morning we saw fresh satellite images of helicopters and attack aircraft well within striking position of Ukraine. There's more Black Sea, more ships heading into the Black Sea. So we're not yet seeing any evidence of a drawdown. And also, just 2 weeks ago, we heard a very similarly worded statement from the Russian Defense Ministry claiming almost exactly the same thing, that troops from 2 of the military districts that are involved were withdrawing. But in the satellite imagery, in social media, open source, we continue to see more troops coming. So it's really just too soon to say if this is real or not. We've seen this at least twice in the past 2 months. So it's just kind of, we just have to wait and see. A week from now, it might be clearer if this is real or not.
So in the wake of all this, Aaron, what is the mood like on the ground where you are among Ukrainians?
Well, Joe, it remains very much business as usual here in Kyiv. We were driving around the city this morning. We didn't see anything of note, no signs of panic. The supermarkets are all stocked, no long lines at the gas stations. People are going about their normal daily lives. Some have chosen to leave Kyiv. Some have evacuated. Some have sent their children to the western portion of the country. But for the most part, most people are staying here and watching the situation while also getting prepared in some cases. We know that the city is readying itself. They're looking at increasing the number of shelters here in the city. They're making sure that their water and power supplies are secured. But for the most part, there is calm, and that is seen, according to experts I've been seeing, talking to, as a good thing. That calm is a critical factor in all of this. The calmness of the Ukrainian people, coupled with the preparedness of the Ukrainian military for a potential attack, combined with this intense diplomatic pressure that is now underway, could be potentially critical deterrents for the Kremlin. Joe.
So, Matt, we heard from Russia's foreign minister yesterday saying Moscow is willing to keep up diplomatic efforts ahead of those talks with Germany's chancellor. We know Germany is heavily dependent on Russian gas. So how difficult could this be for the German leader? How is the Kremlin viewing this meeting?
It's an interesting question. So Scholz is obviously kind of the newest leader on the block in this regard, and this is going to be. He's also the last one in a long line of Western leaders that have kind of cycled through on phone calls and in-person visits. But he's also, as you mentioned, the gas dependency. Germany is among the most dependent on Russian gas, and also he's entering Moscow today on a very interesting day of messaging. As you mentioned, Lavrov saying that Russia's open for diplomacy. These apparent signals this morning that Russia might be willing to start to back some of those troops away. So in a sense, he's arriving in a very different situation than Macron did last week, for example. And we've heard from the Kremlin that these might be very long talks. So it is kind of this sense of maybe a last-ditch diplomatic effort. But again, it's all complicated by this very kind of drastic change in Kremlin messaging this morning. So we'll just have to see how it plays out today.
Matt and Aaron, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Let's now bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell with the latest on the U.S. response to this crisis. Kelly, good morning. So U.S. officials have been warning an invasion could happen in a matter of days. There's this new intelligence. What's the latest on what they're saying about the timing?
Well, it remains tense, and there, of course, is great concern, and the White House will be watching very closely these reports of Russia maybe changing its posture along the border, as Matt was outlining. Too soon to tell on that. But part of what the White House is trying to say is there still is room for diplomacy if Vladimir Putin is willing to engage on that. And we're seeing some of that today with the German chancellor there, and with the expectation of a day full of talks with the German chancellor, who, of course, was just here at the White House a few days ago. And President Biden has been talking with and in close contact with his European partners, trying to have everyone on the same page and trying to, through each of the conversations they have been having, press the same message that there would be a very high cost to Russia if they go forward into Ukraine, and to try to say that there would be a united response, and it would be economic in nature, and it would be crippling for Russia. There could, of course, be consequences for Europe and the United States as well economically that would come from that. So they're trying to use whatever measures they can. Now, on the timing, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby talked about some of the intelligence that the U.S. has been watching and the concern that we're in a window now where there could be action from Russia at any point. Here's John Kirby.
Even over the last 24 to 48, over the course of the weekend, Mr. Putin has added military capability along that border with Ukraine and in Belarus. I won't get into a specific date. I don't think that would be smart. I would just tell you that it is entirely possible that he could move with little to no warning.
One of the questions has been, would Russia take any action during the time of the Olympics, which run through Sunday? And the U.S. has been consistently saying in the last few days that that is a possibility. And so that's part of why we've seen this heightened sense of caution and warning, and the flurry of diplomatic activity, because they don't believe that the international sort of peaceful sporting event is any kind of protection against action from Russia if Vladimir Putin were to decide that it was the right time to move. Savannah, Joe?
And Kelly, one of these actions that we've seen taken, we mentioned at the top of the show, the U.S. temporarily closing its embassy in Kyiv, moving it to the western part of the country away from the Russian border. What does this move mean for the diplomatic staff still in Ukraine, those who are moving to the western part of the country, and any American citizens who are still in the country?
Well, the message for American citizens who are not part of the diplomatic corps is to leave Ukraine. The U.S. is saying there will not be an effort to send U.S. military into the country for any rescue mission if there is an armed conflict later. So they're saying leave now, and that there are NATO partners along the border where U.S. Citizens can get easy access to NATO countries where they would be safe. So that message has been going out for weeks, and it has been ramped up. Regarding the diplomats, they have drawn down significantly the number of working diplomats in the missions, the diplomatic missions in the different sites in Ukraine. So in the capital city of Kyiv, that was the main location. But intelligence has suggested that that could be an attack site, not the U.S. embassy per se, but the city itself. And so they have moved to the far western city of Lviv to try to give some distance and to have an operating place for American diplomatic personnel, a very small number, we're told, but to give them physical distance away from the Russian border.
And Kelly, before I let you go, let's talk about the potential paths to diplomacy that remain. So far, efforts by the U.S. and other countries, I mean, they really haven't gone anywhere. We've also really seen other countries take the lead on diplomatic conversations with the Kremlin. How is the U.S. working with its European allies at this point to keep a peaceful option on the table?
Well, President Biden would say he spoke to Putin directly this weekend, and so that he is engaged as well. Obviously, this is in Europe's backyard, and so part of what the U.S. position has been is that the European leaders have a great deal at stake here, and they have to have a large voice. But the U.S. has a sacred commitment, as the president will often say, through the NATO partnership to defend those European allies if there is aggression that extends beyond Ukraine to those NATO partners. So it is one of those things where on the surface we're not seeing any diplomatic breakthroughs. If there is any break that moves toward peace, that could be something that would happen with little notice, and one that all parties involved here are saying they're still hopeful could happen. Savannah, Joe?
All right. Kelly O'Donnell, thank you so much.
Now to an unexpected twist in Sarah Palin's defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. A federal judge announced yesterday he will be throwing out the former Alaska governor's case. He said the plaintiff, Palin, failed to meet the high standard of proof needed in a libel case. The judge says he will allow the jury to continue deliberating and reach a verdict. And when that time comes, he'll dismiss the case. NBC News legal analyst Danny Tsavalos joins us with more. So, Danny, let's start with the basics. The burden of proof. It is on Palin's team to meet that standard in proving the New York Times defamed her. How high is that standard?
It's very hard. Normally, in negligence cases, the burden is a preponderance of the evidence. That really just means 51%. But when it comes to defamation cases, the standard rises to clear and convincing evidence. That's a higher burden for a plaintiff to meet. And then, in addition, she has to show constitutional malice because she is a public figure, the most public of figures in a category of public figures. And that means instead of negligence, she has to prove that the Times was essentially reckless. In fact, really more than reckless, that they pretty much knew that what they were publishing was false, or they basically put their fingers in their ears and said, la, 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 I don't want to hear the truth, before they published. And the judge in this case said the record just doesn't show that. It may show some sloppy work. And he said from the bench that he wasn't happy granting this motion, but that in his opinion, the fact that there was back and forth between editor and writer shows that he didn't believe that he was disregarding the truth.
So here's the question I think a lot of folks have. Why let the jury keep deliberating if the judge plans to dismiss this case?
It has very little to do with this trial. This trial is over. The only thing that happens now is Palin loses, and now she has a chance to lose some more. So she will not win the day. This is all about appeal and creating a more complete record. Yes, it's unusual for it to work out this way, but essentially now on appeal, if the appeals court decides Judge Rakoff just got it wrong, one of the options is they might just reinstate the verdict instead of sending it back down for a brand new trial. But in addition, allowing the jury to come back with a verdict does create a more complete record when this case inevitably goes up on appeal to the Second Circuit. And really, the judge is probably thinking ahead to when it goes to the Supreme Court.
And yeah, so what are Sarah Palin's options here moving forward now?
Appeal, appeal, appeal. She's got to appeal the case. and it's going to go up to the Second Circuit, and the court there will decide whether or not Judge Rakoff made a bad decision here. So the day is over at trial. Maybe it'll come back for a trial years from now, months from now, but this case, as it is today, Palin loses. Whether the jury comes back with a verdict in her favor or whether the jury comes back and says Palin loses, she loses today.
And what are the implications of a case like this when it comes to journalism and the future of journalism?
That's really what this is about. Journalists everywhere are watching this case because it's not often that especially the New York Times, it gets sued, but it doesn't lose. I don't think it's lost in 50 years, a case like this. And the reality is, what is the standard, generally speaking, for news organizations to be held liable, especially the Times, which no matter what you think of the Times, one way or another, they absolutely go through the most layers of review compared to a lot of websites and blogs and other things out there that go through no review whatsoever. So journalists should be very concerned about this case and be watching it closely because it really does set the standard for reporting on public figures like Sarah Palin.
Danny Savalos, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it. There are new questions this morning about former President Trump's financial dealings amid ongoing civil and criminal investigations in New York. The Trump Organization's accounting firm, Mazars, says it is cutting ties with the company. In a letter, the accountants say that the organization's financial statements from June of 2011 to June of 2020 can no longer be viewed as reliable. It's these same documents that the Trump Organization used to obtain massive loans. Now, New York Attorney General Letitia James included that letter to the Trump Organization in court filings for her ongoing civil probe into Donald Trump's business practices. The former president claims the probe is illegitimate and the company has denied wrongdoing in response to the investigation. A spokesperson for the Trump Organization characterized this letter as actually good news for the company, saying in part it renders the investigations by the DA and AG moot. Mazars says it will no longer work with the Trump Organization. Both the civil and a separate criminal investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney remain ongoing.
Now, more and more states are making changes to their mask and vaccine mandates. Washington, D.C. is rolling back its indoor mask mandate, and Philadelphia is considering dropping its vaccine requirement for indoor dining. These decisions come as cases and hospitalizations continue to decline. Joining us now is Dr. Bob Lahita. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian Medical School and the director of autoimmune and rheumatic diseases at St. Joseph Health, as well as the author of Immunity Strong. Dr. Lahita, always great to have you with us. So while cases and hospitalizations are down, which is great news, deaths are actually still up. Explain that there. Why is that? Why are deaths up if cases are down? And also, what do you think about rolling back mask mandates right now?
Well, the first thing I can say is that cases are dramatically down. Vaccinations do work. But remember, Savannah, there haven't been any miracle drugs. There hasn't been any reason to see this significant decline of infection. Last year, we were testing only the people who were very sick. This year, we are testing everybody, whether you have symptoms or don't have symptoms, so that the numbers are declining based on testing. But in the ICU, those who are very, very ill still succumb to the disease. And, you know, 80% of the ICU beds in the country are occupied, but the numbers of deaths are down to about 27%, and let's say in some states even 10%. So it's a dramatic decline in the number of severe cases in the ICU.
Now, doctor, I want to ask you about the potential of a second booster shot. So Sweden's public health agency is recommending that people 80 and over receive a second booster. So that essentially is a fourth overall shot. Can we expect a fourth shot to be coming soon for most Americans? And what do you make of that? Do you see people going and getting a fourth shot?
I don't see a fourth shot as being realistic. However, Sweden's got a great idea in that people over 80, the case fatality rate in that population is very, very high when they get the COVID infection. So I can understand them trying to give a second booster. However, I don't see it realistic here in this country as giving a second booster.
I actually have a viewer question related to this for you, doctor. This is from Van in Jacksonville asking, how long does the effect of the booster shot last? It's been about 6 months since I received a booster shot. Should I seek another vaccine shot to sustain my immunity? What do you say to that, doctor?
I say that the booster shot wanes after 4 months. And we still have cellular immunity. And indeed, those who have been infected previously have natural immunity in addition to having received the full vaccine and the booster. So immunity probably goes beyond 4 months. But as far as measuring neutralizing antibody and perhaps some forms of cellular immunity, I think it goes way beyond 4 months. So I don't really think you have to worry. But the actual booster shot lasts only 4 months.
All right. Great answer there, Dr. Bob Lahita. Thank you so much. I'm sure Van, who asked that question, thanks you as well. And if you have a question for one of our doctors, please do let us know. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com and let us know if you'd like to stay anonymous.
Going to check on your morning news now weather.
Which means Bill Cairns joins us. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Speaking of winter, we got a pretty significant storm heading into the middle of the country, and with it, we're going to have a whole variety of issues. And today's not bad, but starting tomorrow and then into Thursday, it's really the high impact days, a lot of travel issues along with it. So the storm doesn't look like much now. It's a little bit of clouds and a little bit of blue over the Rockies. It won't be until this storm gets into the plains that it will start to cause significant problems. The first issue, severe weather. This storm will have the potential to even spawn some February tornadoes in Oklahoma and Texas. We're going to watch out. This isn't for today. This is Wednesday evening and Wednesday night from Dallas to Oklahoma City into areas of Arkansas. And this should last into Thursday morning as these storms will move from Little Rock to Memphis. They should weaken by the time they get to Atlanta and Nashville. But during the day Thursday, again, isolated tornadoes and wind damage possible, Alexandria to Jackson. And this has enough warm weather with it that we're actually going to have significant snow melt and along with it some heavy rain in areas of the Ohio Valley. So southern Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois under flash flood watches at this time. And the rainfall totals could be anywhere between 2 to 3 inches of rain. Along with the snow melt, temperatures in the 50s and 60s, that's problematic this time of year. And this will be a heavy rain event for areas of Kentucky and Nashville, even North Georgia and the mountains of North Carolina. But we don't expect the flooding problems like we do in areas of Ohio. So for today's forecast, it's one more cold, chilly morning in the Northeast, and then that warm up begins. Temperatures are very mild in the middle of the country. Watch out for those winds today in the plains. We could have some brush fires even forming. If they do, they will spread rapidly in Oklahoma and Texas. And then for tomorrow, there's that warm up into D.C., New York, and Boston. And even when you see that we're in the teens in the northern plains and 70s in Texas, that's usually a good indication we have a pretty big storm in the middle of the country. We'll talk more about the snow and ice forecast next hour.
Oh, that's something. The ice forecast. All right. Can't wait.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.